Hi, everyone. I'm Miss Crystal Garrity. I'm the Secretary of the Guidance Office, and this is the College Roundtable panel for the college essay. I will be helping to moderate comments as they roll in, so feel free to ask any questions of our panelists. Oh, looks like we have 0 viewers. I should wait. It's my first time using this platform. Oh, now folks are rolling in. So we're just going to give it a minute or two until we've got a solid group, and then we'll get started. In the meantime, I hope everyone, panelists and students alike, are having an okay start to the school year. I know it's a little weirder than usual. All right, I'm just going to give it 1 minute more, and then at 3:04, we're going to get started. I'm going to repeat for folks who just logged in that you are welcome to post some comments in the YouTube chat. They will come over to us here, and folks are going to be able to respond to those questions, and I will be helping to moderate. It's a lovely fall day outside. I took 4 minutes before this broadcast to go and take a quick little 4-minute meditation before we got started. It's such a lovely day.
Any minute you can get off of Zoom is precious, right?
Absolutely. I got to meet with lots of amazing students today in their quest for their college process. So that was great. So I'm going to get started so I can hand it all over to you all. It looks like we have about 14 or 15 participants so far, so that's a good starting point. For those just logging in, I'm Miss Garrity, Miss Crystal Garrity. I am the Guidance Office Secretary. Those of you who are familiar with the Guidance Office know that I'm in the office today. You can see by our windows behind me. I'm going to be here during the college essay panel to help moderate comments, answer any questions that are maybe more ARHS related versus essay related. And you all can feel free to put things into the comments, and we will do our best to answer things. If anyone has questions or comments, post along. And I'm going to hand it over to our college admission panelists who are going to be able to tell you a little bit more about the college essay and what schools are looking for.
And then there were 4. Should we just introduce ourselves before we dive in? Does that sound good? So my name's Liam Daly, Associate Director of Admissions at Beloit College in Wisconsin, small liberal arts college. And I'll pass it over to Vanessa, who's above me on my screen at least.
I'm above you on my screen as well. Hi, my name is Vanessa Price. I'm an Assistant Director of Admission at Sarah Lawrence College. I actually attended Smith College, so I know and love the Pioneer Valley very well, and I'm excited to talk to you today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Deandra Berthium. I am an assistant director at Suffolk University in downtown Boston. Really excited to talk to you about the essay today.
All right, and I am Nathan Braj, assistant director at the University of Hartford, so small to medium private institution in West Hartford, Connecticut. So not actually in the city. For those of you who have that concern, we'll talk a little bit more about us on a different level some other time.
Does somebody want to jump in and just to give kind of a basic overview of what it is we're talking about today? What is the essay? Why do you write it? Why does it matter? Where does it go?
Sure, I can do that if you guys want. Perfect. So the college essay itself is, depending on which application a student is using, whether it's the Common App or a school's individual app, is really a good opportunity for the assistant director or admissions counselor to learn a little bit more about a student on an individual level. As many of you know, the college application process does come hand in hand with, your grades and potentially standardized test scores. This is really the first opportunity that we get to see a student beyond the numbers, if you will. So it can be anything as small as your first hit you ever had in Little League T-ball to, a huge piece of adversity that you fought through in high school to just why it is that you want to pursue your major or potential career that you're looking at. So, it's kind of a broad topic here that we're chatting about, but we're going to give you kind of as much insight as we can from school to school about what it is, little things that we like to look for. And that's where you folks come in, being able to post comments and questions and let us know throughout your process how this is going for you, first of all, with everything being virtual, and how we can help you lift a little bit of that stress out of that process, if you will.
Yeah, and just jumping off of that, I think we're really happy to talk about the big college essay, which is usually the essay you submit on your Common App or on an individualized school's application. But there's also supplement essays to consider, and I'm happy to talk more about that. But those are usually additional or optional essays that you can write with prompts specific to the college you have in mind. For example, Sarah Lawrence has 4 different questions to pick from, and you respond to one of the questions in 250 to 500 words. And that's just another opportunity to share another part of your story with us. And usually in a way that's more tailored to the college, because we definitely understand that your Common App essay or your main college essay is going to every school that you're applying to. So we don't expect it to be super tailored to our individual schools. But the supplement essays are a bit of a different story, and I'm happy to go into that a little bit more later too.
So how about the writing process? I think I can just say very briefly, I imagine a lot of the people that we're talking to today are seniors, so hopefully you've at least started thinking about your essays if you're not in the middle of writing them and tweaking them and things like that. I'll just put a quick plug out there for juniors that this is probably not something you want to leave until October of your senior year. So something you could start thinking about in the spring, certainly over the summer. You could pull a number of the Common App prompts and start thinking about them, write a couple different drafts, get some people's feedback. And if you can have this, almost done by September or early October your senior year, it'll give you a lot more flexibility to think about all the other stuff that are parts of the college application process. But for seniors, for those of you who are wrestling with it right now, do you guys have some sort of tips or tricks that you want to share about what you think makes a really good essay, or ways to write it, ways to sort of, keep your own voice shining through and do something unique?
Yeah, I can jump in on that. I think just the most important thing to know is we want students to write about something that they're passionate about. So we really do get to know who you are as an individual, because really that is our only opportunity to kind of get to learn more about you as a student outside of your academics and activities you're involved in within your school. So really just, making sure you're writing about what you want to write about and not necessarily what you think we want to read about. So just really staying true to yourself and writing about something that you're passionate about.
Definitely. And I know we chatted about maybe each sharing one or two of our favorite essays. But I think the essays that always stand out to me are the ones that no one else could have written but you. And that doesn't mean you have to like break ground on something completely new. You don't have to do like fancy research or anything, but just the ones, or as Deandra was saying, where your voice really comes through. And advice one of my former colleagues used to give was that if you print out your essay and like cut your name off it and left it on the floor of your school and somebody picked it up, would they know that you wrote it? Would it be something just really specific to your story and your voice? And some of us are like introverts and go to really big schools, so that advice doesn't apply, but hopefully that the concept translates.
One thing that I would add to that is that I think that the essay gets a ton of stress and pressure around it, right? It's this huge thing where you have to sort of tell your whole story, share every possible piece of information about you, talk about the most intense or terrible or crazy thing that ever happened to you. And I think that it's really important to remember that the whole application tells your story, and the essay is just one piece of that. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be this big, huge event or moment or realization, but it does have to be well written. And I think that we're probably going to talk about writing in about 18 different ways today. I think that writing in your own voice is probably one really good definition of good writing. But if you write a really good essay, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. Even if it is not about, some sort of earth-shaking, realization or something like that. If you write a good essay that's in your voice about something, has some sort of interesting point or story or little tidbit about you, that'll probably do the trick. It doesn't have to be this huge sort of, kind of all caps moment in your life. Anything you want to add to that, Nathan?
Yeah, just kind of reiterating everything that you've all said. It doesn't necessarily have to be one specific experience or, breakthrough that you've gone through, but it has to draw us in. It has to be something that, you're excited to write, which makes us excited to read it. I have, read countless personal statements and college essays, and the ones that I remember are the ones that stood out to me, obviously. So yeah, I mean, that's the shortest way to say what I'm trying to get out of my mouth.
Yeah, and I think that there's so much pressure on the big essay that sometimes I really like reading supplement essays, and I have this suspicion that it's partly because there's just less people have a little less pressure on them, and they just kind of can write about what's on their mind and what inspires them, whatever answer inspires them. So I wouldn't ignore those supplement questions, but also, I think maybe a roundabout way of saying, like, you can take a little bit of pressure off yourself. As Liam was saying, like, this isn't the end all be all. I hate when people post videos of like the essay that got me into X school, or like the essay that got me denied from X school. Like, especially with holistic admissions, we're not just looking at the essay is not a make or break. There's no make or break point on any of the pieces of your application in a holistic process. So we are looking at your test scores when relevant, your transcripts, those letters of recommendation. So know that that's not the only way that you're sharing your story with us. So it's okay to just kind of take a deep breath and just share your story, and it doesn't have to be like the greatest essay even you've ever written. It really doesn't.
Right, and it probably won't be, because it's actually a really, really hard essay to write, right? I bet that there are a lot of you who are sort of tearing your hair out over this essay who, write a AP, literature paper every couple of weeks and could do it in your sleep, and right. But it's very different to sit down and analyze a book or do historical research or present scientific research or whatever it might be, than to sit down and say, okay, me, what do I say about that? I think it's always really good for folks in our role every once in a while to sit down with the Common App prompts and try to figure out what the heck we would write about, because it's really hard. So I think we all understand that we put you in a little bit of an awkward position. You may be a really good writer, you may be comfortable writing, but this is probably something you haven't done a lot of. Do we want to share some of those favorite essays? Does anybody have one that jumps to mind? I can go first, so we don't. All right, great. Go
for it. Okay, I have two that I always think of. And the caveat is that neither of these students were accepted, but they were still some of my favorite essays. So I think that's just, there are other parts of that, even though they wrote really incredible essays, the other, like an amazing essay can't always save you, if that makes sense. But I still love these essays. The first one was about this this was from this student who he was like considering himself like he took himself very seriously, and like he loved classical music. He would have like really just like highbrow things. And then Kesha's new album came out, and he just was like torn over it because he loved it so much and didn't consider it highbrow. And it just sounded like him. And to my point earlier, no one else could have written this essay. But it's not about some like earth shattering thing to happen. It was just over about his conflict for loving the Kesha album. And I love that because it felt very much in his voice. No one could have written this for him. And then the other essay, it was a topic that I don't think is necessarily like particularly unique. It was a student who wrote about being the only girl on her high school's golf team. And she just wrote about it with a lot of empathy and compassion, both like for herself and for her community. And I hate that we talk about like grit in the college admission process, but she did show grit, and she stuck it out for 4 years, even though the boys on the team were not super nice to her always. But I appreciated that vulnerability that she showed in sharing that experience. So 2 very different essays that stuck out for very different reasons and were very memorable to me.
I do think that point that, that young woman is not the only young woman who's written an essay about that, and that didn't keep it from being a really memorable essay, is a really important point. I think it's really easy to get hung up on, if you can write, about this topic that no one else has ever written before, it's going to be really memorable. And that's true. But we can also read, 20 essays in a row about, folks' love for, playing baseball or whatever it might be. And 19 of those might sound like a lot of other essays we've read. And the 20th one, we might go, wow, that was really unique and insightful. And I have a really good sense for who this person is and why they'd be a great fit at this college, even though the topic was exactly the same. So I think that's just an important thing to keep in mind.
My mom always says Moses told the last original joke, which I agree with. And I think it's just about finding your own voice to put into the topic, even if it, to Liam's point, is a topic we see a lot.
I can jump in and talk about one of my favorite essays. So one of my favorite essays that I read was a student who talked about always wanting to be Spider-Man when they were little, and then wrote about how the things they did like in their day that made them like a modern day Spider-Man. So that one was really unique and stood out to me. It was just really well written, and I really enjoyed reading it. And literally, I always think like every reading season, I think of that essay.
Yeah, I'll hop in. One that stands out to me, like you're saying, Deandra, every time I sit down to read an app, is one a student was writing about all these hardships that they had gone through, all these battles that they fought, and then the last paragraph was essentially them saying that none of what they had written about happened to them. It happened to one of their classmates, and it was just something that they had learned a lot about the people around them. And they were going into kind of those human services style majors. So they were showing through the essay how much they cared about the people around them, that they knew enough to write, this piece about them. So it kind of spoke to, their interest in those human services, but it also spoke to their attention to detail about the people around them. And again, it drew me in because I was just feeling for this kid nonstop. And then it was, I'd like to help that kid, not I am that kid. So it's just a different perspective to take for sure.
Yeah, I think probably any time you can sort of get us heading in one direction and then change our expectations a little bit or something like that is always good. An essay that I really liked, I was helping a student with last year, a young woman who grew up with dual citizenship in Ireland and the US and had sort of moved back and forth, and was writing about sort of not quite owning an identity in either place and not really knowing what her home was and all these kinds of things. And what was really, really great about the essay was that it was just absolutely hilarious. And so there were all of these great jokes about cows and accents, and I laughed out loud a couple of times while I was reading it. And then there was this really great sort of moment at the end, same thing you were just talking about, Nathan, where, after all of these, what just kind of felt like jokes, there was some really great insight into who she is and what she would bring to a college campus. But I also really like the essay as an example because she's a young woman who, as far as I can tell, has had a really great life, right? And I think that if she had tried to say, I've lived here and I've lived here and I don't feel at home anywhere and it's been really, really hard, I would have been like, I I don't know about that, right? I think, but because she was able to sort of be a little bit self-deprecating and kind of acknowledge that, all of this is really good and it's sort of a minor problem, and she's loved being in both places, she's learned a lot, and use sort of humor and lighten it a little bit, it then actually lent a lot more credence and weight to the takeaways that she was sharing. So I think that it's really, it's important to be honest about your experience and whatever that is, and you don't need to make it something that is more or less or different, right? We're really just trying to get a feel for you and what your story is. How about maybe some sort of things to avoid, or things that don't necessarily always work? Anything like that?
I think speaking to your last point with that you made previously was that don't try to spin things to make it sound worse than it is. Tell us a story, tell us kind of what you're going through, and be matter of fact about it. Don't try to exaggerate bad things or minimize some of the good. Just be upfront about it.
I think going off that point too, if a student, definitely if you want to talk about some kind of, hard thing that you went through, that's great. But, maybe just share, how you are now, how you've overcome that. I think sometimes I read essays and I read about those hardships, but I just read about the hardships. I don't read about, like how the student's doing now, or like what you did to like overcome it. So definitely if that's something that you want to write about, that's okay. But just make sure to maybe include that part as well.
Yeah, I'd say I liked something one of my colleagues used to say, was that the essay is the trailer for your life. It's not the whole movie. So you don't need to feel the pressure to tell us your entire life story. I think it's a lot more impactful to hear about one really important experience that you've had versus I was born in wherever and then I moved and then this was hard and this was hard. Like that's interesting, but it's not really, I don't think it's as impactful as hearing one really compelling story.
Yeah, that's another way of saying that is that the essay is not a resume, right? So it's not your life story. It is also not just a list of 20 different things. I mean, there's an activities list in the Common App, right? There's space for that, and a lot of schools are happy to have you share a resume. The essay really should be kind of one or two things fleshed out and dive deep into. I think another, we've all touched a little bit on sort of, people dealing with, sort of intense experiences or, hardships they've had to deal with in their life. And I just want to put out there that you do not owe it to us to share those stories, right? And I hope that you do not feel like if that's something you don't want to share, you should anyway, because it's gonna be sort of your ticket into college, right? I think that if there are things that have happened to you in your life that you feel like we're not going to be able to understand you without knowing about them, and you feel empowered to share those things, by all means you should. And I think we're going to do everything we can to try to understand where you're coming from, and certainly to try not to sort of hold anything against you or judge what you've been through. But on the other hand, I wouldn't want anybody to feel like there was something that they weren't really comfortable sharing with us, that a parent or a guidance counselor, someone was like, oh, you should write about that, that's going to really sort of tug on somebody's heartstrings or something like that. There are other ways to do that. Your counselor can talk about your background. You can use the additional information section, or possibly an interview or a call with one of us if you want to share something. You don't necessarily need to make the essay the place where you sort of share that story if it's not the right space for it.
Yeah, I'd emphasize that using the additional information section, if there's something you just want to tell us very matter-of-factly, like you were out of school for a certain number of weeks because of a family hardship or a medical thing, you don't have like, I would rather read about something you're really excited and passionate about in the essay, because that gives us more of an idea of what you're going to be like as part of an intellectual and social community. But I'm not telling you not to write about that, but don't feel the pressure of saying, oh, I have to write about something difficult that happened to me. That's a great use of the additional information section. There's also the COVID section this year, if it's COVID related. So if you just want to tell something very matter-of-factly, you don't have to write another essay. I wouldn't encourage you to write another essay for that. But that is a place that I think not everybody knows about until they actually open the Common App and start it. So know that that is there, and that is a great way for you to just very transactionally communicate things with us as well.
Yeah, I've also had students at schools where we didn't sort of accept supplemental, essays or art portfolios or things like that, who use that space. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that sort of happened to you. It doesn't have to be that you had a health struggle or something else go on in your life. You can just say, hey, I wrote a really good essay. My essay's about this. If you have 2 extra minutes, I'd love you to go to this website I built, or I just want you to understand this, other thing that's really important to me in my life. So you can be really creative with how you use that section overall. It's there for you. It's additional information. It's for you to share whatever you want. So certainly take advantage of that. You want to talk about supplements, Vanessa?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I've worked at schools both where we had required supplements, and then Sarah Lawrence has optional ones because we're very big on trusting you to know how you want to share your story. The thing I would emphasize most about supplements is thinking a lot about fit. So thinking both how you fit the college and how the college fits you. I think it's really important to think about it going both ways. And so I think supplements really require you to do your research. I know that it's very tempting to just copy and paste and change out the name of the college for like why I want to go to X. But that's honestly often very transparent when you're doing that. And sometimes you forget to do that. And that's not a good look always. So I think just be mindful of that. And if there's a very common supplement question is, why do you want to go to X school? Which I think is a valid question. And I think something you also owe it to yourself to know the answer to. I always think that there should be not one reason that you want to go to a college. So I think really understanding that and looking for, as you're looking at colleges, I think it's a really good sign when the question that a college is asking excites you. Personally, I rewrote our supplement questions because I thought they weren't exciting enough. And I wanted them to reflect Sarah Lawrence's personality. So we have 4 new supplement questions. And if you hate them, then that's fine. I won't take it that personally, only a little bit. But one of ours is about being a hyphenate. Like Sarah Lawrence students are they're not just directors. They're director, sound designer, linguists. Like they're economists, but they also study Mandarin. Like they're really cool, multifaceted people. And if you're like, that's cool, I want to be that, then that also tells you something about your fit with the college. So I think that's kind of like the high level what I would say. Schools will treat their word counts very differently. I'm a very big proponent of brevity being the soul of wit. So I will never be mad about a shorter essay if it's 250 instead of 500 words, for example. But what we're really looking for is to understanding that the Common App essay, the big essay, that's what you're sending to everybody, as we mentioned earlier. And supplements are what you're specifically sending to the college that is asking for them. So I think putting in as much specificity as you can and showing that you've done your research and showing that you've put a lot of thought into this and that you're not just like applying for the sake of applying, because nobody feels special about that.
Nathan or Gianna, have you guys worked at places that have supplements? Anything you want to weigh in there?
Not that I've been a part of the process for, so I don't have anything constructive that I can add here. So I apologize.
Yeah, I would say the only supplement question we usually ask is why you want to attend our university. So just, really emphasizing and making sure you're sharing that with whatever college you're going to. I think is important.
Yeah, and I think to Vanessa's point, hopefully that's a question you've answered long before you have to write it down, right? If if your list is made up of schools where, you said you Googled schools that have psychology, and then you haven't taken it to that next step where you've tried to figure out what kind of community you want to be a part of, or that faculty guidance is really important to you, or internships are really important to you, or location's important to you, or whatever it is that really matters to you. You probably want to start answering that question for yourself before you start, hitting submit on college applications, because it's going to come up one way or another. It's going to, maybe you get in and then you start talking to somebody like me and I say, oh man, are you so excited to come here? What can we do? Can I introduce you to a faculty or, student, or, get you out here for a visit or something like that? And you go, can you tell me about what you offer on your campus? Right. So you want to try and figure that out a little bit earlier in the process, and maybe you only apply to 8 schools instead of 15 schools because you've answered that question for yourself. That's okay too. Just want to remind everybody that we would love if there are questions that you have that you want us to answer, you can submit them in the Q&A. We'll keep rambling until the session's over, but if there are things that would be really helpful to you, by all means share those with us. Other things that we haven't touched on, guys, anything you think we should cover?
What about advice for just the writing side of it? I think we've talked a lot about kind of the storytelling part of it. Do you all have advice for? I always talk about like the editing process. Do you have advice kind of on the writing and editing process that you like to give students? I can start if you want a moment to think. I like to encourage students to be mindful and selective of who they ask to read it. Please ask somebody else to read it. I've read some essays that I was like, girl, you really should have had somebody read this, and they would have helped you out. But I think an English teacher is a great person to read it. You do not need to, please don't pay somebody to read your essay. An English teacher is great. A counselor is great. That your friend who always copy edits your English papers is great. But I think be mindful about how many people you have, because it gets to be a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So I think if you ask 1 or 2 people whose opinion and feedback you really trust, that's a great route to go. And be clear if you are like, I only want you to edit for grammar and spelling, or like, I really want some help with the way it's constructed and themes. Because I think that way you're getting the advice that you're looking for, not just somebody who's kind of like dumping on you or projecting. In my experience, an English teacher is a great one, and they'll also be helpful in thinking about how your kind of entire story is constructed. Because they might be like, "Why did you not mention this big thing?" And you're like, "Of course." So that's I think something that a lot of people struggle with, kind of figuring out how to identify. So something to think about.
Yeah, I would mostly agree with that, and just not only having somebody else read it, but read through it yourself. A lot of times you can find a lot of those simple things. I know myself as a high school student, I had a real bad reputation for just writing something and handing it in. So it never hurts to go back through and read it through yourself. Separate yourself from it for a little while too, to kind of clear your head and come back to it and read again. And then bring it to somebody else for grammar and punctuation and things like that. Spelling is another one. There's nothing that frustrates me more sometimes when I'm going through a really well done essay in terms of the storytelling piece, and then there's just one word that's pretty common that's spelled just a little bit wrong. So just little things like that are part of it for sure, and just kind of pay attention to those as you're going through.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Vanessa and Nathan both have talked about. I think my other piece of advice would be to read your essay out loud to yourself. It really can help you with the editing process if you're listening to yourself read it. And if like you stumble on a sentence out loud, then maybe there's some editing to be done. But definitely look over it and have an English teacher look over it. And please capitalize I's when you write your essays. I've read a few essays when the I's aren't capitalized, and it really bothers me. So make sure you're capitalizing all those I's in your essays.
Yeah, I would definitely echo the reading out loud is such a good tip. I do that with almost every, emails I write, like almost anything I do. And not only will that help you catch errors, but I think it's also a really good way to flag if you're not writing in your own voice. And if it feels weird for you to read it out loud, that's probably not a good sign. Particularly, maybe there are cover letters you would write, or certain papers that you would write that need to be in a particular format that don't quite feel the way you would speak. This essay, I would say, as much as possible without absolutely throwing the laws of grammar out the window, should read to some extent the way that you speak. I think, maybe I'd be interested to hear what all of you say. I've worked mostly at schools that are excited when people are a little edgy with their essays, a little creative and things like that. So certainly, if you want to start a sentence with "but," I can't speak for anyone else, but that's not going to bother me, right? I don't want to see an essay that has "however" 15 times through it, right? That's not who you are, I don't think. Could be, but probably not, right? I shouldn't need a thesaurus to read your essay, right? Unless you're, those are words you really use. So I think you can take some liberties. I've read some really great essays that read a little bit more stream of consciousness, or a little bit more poetry than prose, or things like that. And you don't want to do that for the sake of doing it, but if that's really who you are and how you write, you can give that a shot. And I think we'll give you some leeway. There's a big difference between not sticking to, traditional MLA format or something like that, and having a ton of spelling errors in your essay, right? One is a bold, intentional, interesting choice. The other one is, not proofreading enough. So I personally really like essays that sort of flirt with the edge of what's sort of traditional. I don't know. Would you guys agree with that, or do you at your institutions do people sometimes cross the line?
I would agree that I like seeing creative takes. I will make the bold claim that emojis have no place in the college essay. That's my take. I will say that I think I've seen really well done stream of consciousness essays, but I think they're very, very difficult to do well, largely because I know every institution reads a little bit differently. But I usually am writing a couple bullet points about what your essay is. And I think if you can't say in like 2 or 3 bullet points what your essay is about and what you want the admission counselor to take away, you may need to go back and look at the structure a little bit. Just because we want to be able to tell our colleagues, this is what the applicant was communicating to us, not just in your essay, but in every part of your application. Not that we think you should be boiled down to bullet points, but we do have a lot of applications to communicate about in a very short amount of time in committee. So I think making sure that you almost have like a tweet length version of your essay that we could write is very helpful. And I know we have some questions, but I want to see if anybody else has anything to say at that point. So I see we have a question. Eve asks, if there are multiple supplement essays, do you want to see a consistent theme, or is it okay to talk about a bunch of different unrelated topics, activities that interest the student? This is a really good question. So at the last institution I worked with, we had 2 required supplements. One was essentially why X school, and then there were 6 to pick from to answer for your second question. I did not like seeing the same things talked about in all of the essays from the big essay to supplements. Because I'm like, well, I already know that you're the captain of the tennis team. Like, I would have rather learned something different about you. But I think it's most schools will have, I mean, there's definitely some outliers, but most schools will have 1 or 2 supplement questions, not more. Like I said, there are some exceptions. But I would rather, I mean, theme and topic, I guess it can be disparate, but I would rather learn something new about you in every essay, even if it's the same theme from different angles, than reading about your like love for Play-Doh in the same like 3 times. Like you're more than just one thing, essentially. So hopefully that makes sense.
I think that extends beyond just the supplements, right? I think that we're going to see things that are sort of resonant throughout your application, right? You know, if your college essay is about your favorite thing to do, probably that's going to be mentioned in your activities list. Your recommender might mention it. So it's not that things can't come up more than once. But I think you can end up in a situation where your Common App essay is about Play-Doh. And then one of the supplemental essays is like, who's an author you love? And you write almost the same exact essay about Play-Doh, but shorter. And that's clearly a missed opportunity on your part. I had a old colleague who said, if you want to put all your eggs in one basket, it better be a really nice basket. So, I've had applicants where like they are a poet in all caps, right? And 5 different things on their activities list are like different, editorial opportunities they've had and places they've been published and classes they've taken and, lessons they've taken, right? And so there's a real diversity of things that they're doing under that heading. And then their essay is about their love for poetry. And then maybe a supplemental essay is about, one of their favorite poets, right? So it's all poetry, but there are a lot of different things that you're learning about them along the way. It still might be a narrower focus than some schools are looking for. And that's something you might want to think about on a school to school basis. If you're, applying to a particular program, if you're applying to a, particular major or school within a school, or if you're, doing a more broad application, a school might get a little nervous by that. But yeah, probably different school to school on that. Looks like somebody could use just a general sort of a backup for a junior on what is the Common App essay? What are the sort of other essays? When do you write them? What do you write for all schools? What do you write for independent schools? Somebody want to just do kind of a recap in a little more detail on that?
Are you talking about the I'm a junior question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you write a main essay for everywhere and then individual ones based on requirements for each college you apply to. Essentially, yes. So many schools are on the Common Application. So you write one essay, and we, like, if you're applying to our 4 institutions, I believe we're all on the Common App. I know some of you have your own applications as well. We'd all read their same essay, but some schools will invite you to write supplement essays, or they might have other requirements. Some schools might have required interviews, or a creative and performing arts portfolio, or something else entirely. So yes, you write one main essay. That's like it's usually like 600-ish words. That's kind of your story. And we are, again, aware that everybody is receiving the same one. And then some schools will have requirements or optional opportunities to write a supplement with their own, and their school will have their own specific prompt. We didn't really touch on the Common App essay prompts. I believe there's like 6. I never look at which prompt a student responds to because it doesn't usually influence my idea of the essay in one way or another. I don't know if others feel differently. But to me, you're basically writing a personal statement, and I'm not looking at how closely you're answering the particular question, because I think we all understand what the goal is.
Yeah, I think the prompts are there to help you figure out, what some good essay possibilities are, right? So, you can sort of take that and go in any direction. And there is a literally write whatever you want prompt is like the 7th or 8th prompt. So if you look at those prompts and are really feeling stuck, you also, you don't have to feel attached to any of them. That's one other piece of writing advice. And I might have touched on this right at the beginning, but if you have the time, I think it's really helpful to at least sit down and think about how you would answer each one of those prompts. You don't necessarily have to do a full draft, but write a paragraph or write some ideas down or bullet points or something like that. Because if you just sit down and say, oh no, what am I going to write my college essay about, right? It's like going to be the worst writer's block you've ever experienced. So that way you can come up with 7 different possibilities, and you might discover that 3 of them after you've written them down seem a lot more exciting than the other 4, and then you might kind of run with those. But it's a really good way to get started, to just start jotting ideas down in response to those prompts instead of, starting, okay, what am I going to write the essay about? Because that's going to make the process really terrifying. Other tips or tricks? Anything else we think we ought to cover?
I just doubled down on what you all said earlier, and that it's not as stressful as it needs to be. Just take some pressure off yourself. Enjoy the process of writing. Enjoy the process of talking about yourself, because we don't talk about ourselves a lot in this world. So just kind of take the moment and do some reflection and just put yourself on that paper. That's
we talked a little bit about like the hardship essay. I remember my AP Lit teacher, my senior high school, would talk about like the 3 or 4 Ds, like the big scary topics. Like I was divorce, depression, drugs. Do we want to talk about any advice about how kind of handling those kind of bigger, harder topics in an essay?
I know Leah mentioned it earlier. It's talk to what you're comfortable sharing. Those are very difficult topics to talk about. They're sometimes difficult topics to read about. So just make sure that what you're putting on the paper is something that you'd be comfortable saying to us really in person if you really feel that strongly about it. And just, yeah, that would be my biggest piece of advice in that topic. Anybody else have anything they want to add?
I would say there's no need to go for shock value for the sake of it. I know when you're in like writing class, you learn about a hook, which a hook is a great thing to have, but I think going for shock value really just communicates that something shocking happened to you. I think also just remembering that there's a real person who's reading a lot of these essays every day. And I think usually that advice is given in like, you have to stand out. I don't like reading about gross things. I don't like reading about bodily fluids like all day long, particularly. And like, I want you to share your story and be vulnerable and be who you are and share your voice. But I think just being mindful, like is this something that is going to like not influence the person who's reading it today, but is this is it actively I think just asking the question of like, is this actively contributing to sharing your story about who you will be on a college campus academically and socially? I just don't want to read gross things anymore. Maybe that's my big takeaway here.
Yeah, I think the point of like, is this actively contributing positively to my application is a really good one. Again, I think as Nathan said, I think we've all said, at the root, core end of the day, if it's something you feel like we need to know about you, then go for it, right? And then we'll sort of all live with, whatever sort of, comes out of that, because I do think that it's really important that you own this essay and that it's something that matters to you and that you're sharing who you are. But I do think that there's a difference between students who've had something really difficult that they've gone through that has really significantly impacted that sort of the ripple effects from can be seen throughout their whole application. And so I know that we talked earlier about whether or not the essay is the right place to sort of explain those things, but I've seen students do a really good job of using the essay as a way to put the rest of their application in context and help us understand why maybe their transcript looks the way it does, or why they haven't been as involved in activities outside of their family or things like that. And what I think can be really tough is when an application outside of your essay looks really, really sort of strong, essentially, right? It looks like you've been really involved and done really well in school and, had a really positive impact in your community and all of those kinds of things. And then the essay gives us a window into another part of your life that's not really having a positive impact on how we're going to evaluate you. And again, if you feel like you have to tell that story and you want us to know that, then, so be it. It's your choice to make. But I think that if you have an application that's knocking it out of the park, and then you decide that you want to tackle this really difficult topic in your essay that's, going to make us sort of, take a minute, that's a choice you're making. And there's, I think there's a little bit of risk there. And so you definitely want to think about that and own it.
I also just want to reiterate too that you definitely don't have to write your essay about that, and you can again use that additional information section to kind of tell us like if there's something weird on your transcript, there's a reason for it, like definitely use that information there. Use that section to share that information. So if you want to write your essay about it, you can, but don't feel like you have to, and just really use that additional information section on the comment.
You can also communicate with your counselors if there's something you'd rather that they share that they might have better insight into, or you want them to have discretion around or anything like that. That's a very trustworthy source for us as well. Or if you want them to send us an email, it doesn't have to be a part of your application, especially if there's something you'd rather if your parents are reading the application and there's something you don't really want them to know about, that's okay to give us a call, give us an email, and we'll keep things discreet. But I think that's also something to be aware of, that, sometimes something that's really important to your story is not like as the Sarah Lawrence, I read a lot of students who are not out and in their communities, or they're out to their family, but not to school, vice versa. So if this isn't something you want us to know, we would love to know it, but there are other ways of communicating those things beyond the application as well. So just something to be aware of.
I think that's just about all the time we have, right? I think there's another set of workshops coming up. Oh, there's Crystal.
Hey, so I just wanted to give folks a reminder. We've got just a couple minutes left. So if you do have a pressing question, throw it in the chat now. And then I wanted to ask the panelists about something that came up during a professional development time yesterday. Our school is working actively toward an anti-racist education right now. And one of the things that the English department brought up is that they are trying to teach students to write with their own voice. And sometimes that includes their own cultural voice, which may include different types of language. And so I'm wondering, when those kinds of essays cross your desk, what are your reactions? I'm going to pop back out.
Well, I'll start. Initially, it's there's some of that shock factor that we mentioned. Like, you just see it and you can tell that it's just different from every other essay we've read. But as long as speaking to the greater picture of things, we're still trying to take something from it. So if it's taking away the importance to you of the culture and the background, then that's certainly a great piece to add, and a great I guess literary device to use in the essay portion.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that there's a difference between kind of pushing the boundaries or breaking the rules or being a little bit more experimental in a way that I think it's usually pretty easy to tell that someone's doing it on purpose. Doesn't mean that it always works or that it's always the best essay you've ever read, but it's usually pretty easy to say, oh, this person is clearly writing in this voice, right? They're making an active choice to use this language or punctuate in this way to whatever that might look like. And we might not like it. It might cause different reactions in different folks reading the essay, but it's usually pretty easy to say, okay, this person has made sort of an artistic choice to own this, to write in this style. And I think we evaluate that very differently from an essay that just looks sloppy, right? And I hope that we're all pretty good at identifying the difference between choices we might not make in terms of how to write versus something where you just sort of didn't proofread. And I would go out on a limb in regards to this, and this is again something that every individual needs to make a choice about. But I think there's an argument to be made for if you're writing in your voice, and there is a school out there that reads that and says this isn't the kind of voice that we want on our campus, you probably don't want to go to that school. Right. So that's that's something you need to think about and recognize that there is the possibility that some admissions counselor somewhere might read what you've written and say, that's not what we're looking for here. But I think if it's really I hope that if it's really an important part of your identity, you want to own it. And then you want to apply to schools that are going to see that and say, yeah, that's who we're looking for. Absolutely. That was a great essay. So I think that, any choice you make, there's a risk that it's going to, sort of impact someone in the wrong way. But if it's true to who you are, hopefully it's it's going to resonate in the right way with the right school.
Well, thank you all so much for hosting this panel for our students. I'm going to encourage students and parents, if you have further questions, feel free to shoot me an email. If you have further questions for any of our panelists and you would like their contact info, please let me know and I can help connect you. All right. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the group of panels.
Good luck to all the students out there.